F. Scott Fitzgerald, icon of the Jazz Age, an American author whose mythos often overshadows his impressive body of work. F. Scott Fitzgerald was born in 1896 in St. Paul, Minnesota, and his family moved him to New York when he was a young boy. His mom was an important early influence in his writing, and his first story was printed when he was 13. And F. Scott Fitzgerald graduated from Newman Prep School in Hackensack, New Jersey in 1913 and immediately attended Princeton University, where he was well liked by his fellow classmates, but spent so much time practicing his writing that his grades failed. He was soon put on academic probation and then dropped out to join the Army in 1917 due to World War I. It was when F. Scott Fitzgerald was in the Army that he met his wife Zelda when he was stationed near Montgomery, Alabama. Soon they became engaged, as F. Scott Fitzgerald was absolutely crazy for her, but Zelda doubted that he could support them while on a writer's salary. It wasn't until Fitzgerald published his first story, The Side of Paradise, that they finally got married. This Side of Paradise shot F. Scott Fitzgerald into literary stardom. F. Scott Fitzgerald's literary success was closely tied into the 1920s. Fitzgerald published 5 books throughout his career. His last book, The Love of the Last Tycoon, was published posthumously and was actually technically never finished. He also published numerous short stories, such as The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and these short stories are often what paid the bills of his and Zelda's extravagant lifestyle. But by far and away, his most famous work is The Great Gatsby, the story of the American Dream. F. Scott Fitzgerald was part of what's known as the Lost Generation, and this term describes the generation of artists, writers, and composers who are young men during World War I and were often a part of the war. All of them were deeply affected by the war, and it shows in common themes in their work. Fitz, Zelda and Fitzgerald were members of this lost generation, along with T.S. Eliot, Ernest Hemingway, James Joyce, William Faulkner, and John Steinbeck. And although many of them were Americans, they lived in Paris during the post war years, where Gertrude Stein ran a Parisian salon popular with the American expat crowd. Some of the important themes in F. Scott Fitzgerald's work are youth and the jazz age. During the post war years, there was a refocusing on the younger generation, especially younger women. And Fitzgerald wrote about the modern young woman who became known as flappers with their short hair and their short skirts and their bright red lips and their hip flasks. In fact, his first short story collection is entitled Flappers and Philosophers. He describes flappers as bright, outrageous young magical things that like to break social convention and absolutely aghast the older generation. An example of this can be seen in his short story Bernice Bobs Her Hair, as the main character uh, goes through a large transformation as soon as she has a haircut. Zelda is actually considered one of the most infamous flappers in the world. Another common theme in his work is the death of the American dream. Fitzgerald was deeply affected by World War I and the changes that it made to the world. After the war, the old frameworks and the old ways of thinking about the world just no longer seem to apply, and the American dream seems to be a relic of a bygone age. This theme is especially prevalent in The Great Gatsby, as the main character is incapable of living up to the promise of the American dream, even though he is charming and rich. He dies tragically at the end of the story. This theme can sadly also be seen in Fitzgerald's own life, as it was full of alcoholism and debt. Another theme in F. Scott Fitzgerald's work is age and despair. And in F. Scott Fitzgerald's mind, these two themes are deeply connected, and this sharply contrasts to his descriptions of young people who are full of promise and bright and sparkling in some way. Age does not bring wisdom, it does not bring a sense of place, it does not bring comfort. Age just brings infirmity and misery, and somehow the world dulls with age. Fitzgerald explores these themes in his short story, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, in which, by some trick of fate, a man is forced to age backwards. And for a man who feared aging as much as he did, it can be considered a blessing in some way that Fitzgerald died at the age of 44.